Evolutionary Org Hardcore 2.0 coming your way. This is going to be episode 73. It's going to be a fun one. We're going to talk about why 15 milliliter vials are better than 10 milliliters with Euro Pharmacies, one of the top brands out there. And it's one that Mobster I know loves. It's one that I always recommend and I trust myself. And here's the thing. In the industry, they're always coming up with new stuff, but this is a really good one because it saves money, and it carries the money over to you. It saves room, and there's a lot of different advantages. So we're gonna go over all that. We're gonna talk about the history of how steroids have been presented to consumers, why EP took this step forward. We're gonna talk about the 15 milliliter vial options that EuroPharmacies has and how to use each of the compounds. And some of the compounds are the same. They have like a Masteron E, Masteron Prop. So we're going to talk about the differences. A lot of people always ask that. So that's a really good question. We're going to kind of go over that and tell you how to use them, how to dose them, how often to take them, how to use them in a cycle. A lot of information. And we're going to talk about why EuroPharmacies is considered one of the top brands in the world. Definitely, I would say top 3, top 5 brands in the world of steroids, and what got them there and how they're staying there. So this is going to be a really fun one. So Mobster, let's talk about first the histories of how steroids have been presented. You've been around a long time. You've seen steroids for decades. Talk about that.
Yeah, Steve. So pre-show research as well, just to refresh myself in terms of what's available to the marketplace from lab supplies. So I made some generalized notes here, and the long and the short of it is, Steve, that we are more than familiar. Any of us that have used steroids, especially in the last 10 or 15 years, every person, every dog, every underground lab, every kitchen sink lab, call it whatever you like, everybody's using the 10 mil vials. And so for whatever reason, we've kind of thought that was it. But the reality of the situation is thus. Some of us that have been around, as Steve says, a long ass time, remember the fact that and people still like these now, Steve. They love amps, the ampule, where you have to score the glass and break the top off and put your in, and it's typically like 1 mil, Steve. And the reason why people like that is they think, oh, if you're going to go to the trouble of molding this glass bottle and sealing it in and having to use heat to melt the glass and all that kind of stuff, you're not going to fake it. So there's always going to have its fans. And that's actually how I kind of got started. But as I've said on other shows, there are so many other options. And we've talked about tren and the fact that it was created for humans, but it ended up being given to livestock, specifically cattle. And I've read stuff on the Australian market, what's available out there and how stuff. And of course, I've worked a meat processing plant where my first job there was unloading the meat from the back of the truck. So you talk to the drivers where they come from, the abattoir, quality control fellow that was explaining some parts of the industry to me, and so on and so forth. So you go, right, we are familiar with PEDs, with bodybuilding, with the ampoules, and then later on the 10 mil vials. In reality, those are not the only options. I did a little bit of pre-show research, as I say, and online lab supplies. You can look this up, guys. Check for yourself. And there was different companies. I looked at 2, 3 companies, only briefly, quick look, see what's available. They go from 6 mil to 100 mil just for injections. And you might have seen this in the occasional movie where it's like a small jar. Everything else is exactly the same. It's got the same rubber bung, etc. And it's almost put onto the top of a gun. And then they use the gun to inject. And that would be 100 mil. And then up to 500 mil. So that is definitely like a jam jar size for what's called an infusion. That's not necessarily injected, but dripped into you and so on and so forth. In the veterinary side, and this is where I was referring to the cattle industry, etc., Steve, and also what I handled when I was unloading those trucks back in the day, which was specifically pork. And they do, the 100 mil is kind of the starting place. And they go up to 1,000 mil bags and bottles. And they will use a special gun, a means of handling this on top of the gun. Yeah, and it's stupid stuff like they have to check, well, certainly back in the day, it might be more frequent now, Steve, but they have to change the actual pin itself every 10 animals. So the risk for contamination was quite high. Typically in the veterinary industry, the amount of steroid, tren, whatever, per milliliter is a lot lower than what we would use for performance enhancement. So people got excited. Oh my God, I can get a 500 mil vial, I can get a 1,000 mil bag or a bottle. Yeah, maybe it's like 20 mil of the active ingredient in the fluid. So it's really no good for you. And then, of course, the risk of contamination are much higher and so on and so forth. But yeah, the history is simple, Steve. You go with, and we're not doing this in performance enhancement. You think about how these things were first presented. You think about how they were first created and what they were being used for. So, for example, we can find examples online of these big bottles, even the smaller bottles, even the little tiny 6 ml bottles, where it would be one use, or if it was the same size as what we're used to, the again milligrams per milliliter was a lot lower because it was being used for medical purposes. Or as I said again, if it's an infusion, you could have a steroid in a drip going into the muscle or whatever else, or into the vein, or whatever it's being used for. So the way that it's used and the way that it needs to be given to the body and the amount it needs to be given is different. When it comes like to the history, Steve and I talk about these kind of things all the time. We say, okay, when we see in underground labs, and I mean the really bad kitchen sink type places, or Mexican labs as we imagine them to be, especially the ones back in the day, Steve. Why they did what they did? Was it a pricing thing? Probably. They presented things, and we've got used to things being presented in a certain way because that's what they could buy. And was it cheap? Was it easy to manufacture, and so on and so forth? Why do we just have 10 ml vials? There's no actual good reason for it, Steve. There really isn't. It's not because it's easy to smuggle. The 15 mils ain't that big. It's not because it's any better or any worse. It's just what we got used to. So one of the things I wanted to talk about a little bit was why EuroPharmacies have introduced this. Now I haven't sat down with EuroPharmacies and said why have you done it, but I can think of a couple of reasons why they have. And the kind of very obvious thing is to separate yourself in the marketplace. That's kind of number one. Why do you need to do what everybody else is doing? That's not innovation. That's not a step forward. You don't have to copycat every other company. You can do something different. That's number one. Number two is it's just ease of use, Steve. Think about the amount that we buy for a cycle. I would reckon, and I'm just talking about typical dosages, let's say for testosterone, that most cycles are a minimum of around 30 mil total. Now, I know people that take 25 mil a week, different combinations of PEDs, but the reality is how many injections you're doing per week, how long's the vial going to last, and so on and so forth. It's not really that much of a pricing issue. That I'd argue slightly, Steve, because some of the 10 mils are still available from their resellers, and they will, I think, sell out and completely be replaced by the 15 mils. Not everything, and again, it's going to come down to demand as well. But again, it's probably as easy to pack and distribute, and for the user, the end user, i.e. us, listener, to use 2 15 mil vials versus 3 10 mil vials. So it comes down to what people want and how they're using their product and stuff like that. And then I think literally it could well be it's actually ever so slightly cheaper for the manufacturing process, and it is ever so slightly cheaper if you take 3 10 mil vials of a product, again, let's say testosterone, and compare that to 2 15 mils of an identical ester version of testosterone. You actually work out that it's a little bit less price for you, the end customer, and that certainly seems to be the case right now. I mean, like I said, Steve, think about how other industries have advanced, what companies have done. I've been in the supplement industry, and when people ask us for more flavors, but I knew that certain flavors would sell all day long. So we tried to be innovative, but the product didn't sell, although the customer said that that's what they wanted. The same thing applies here. It would be a complete and utter waste of time to spend tens of thousands of dollars investing in the new vials if they didn't sell. And I can tell you right now that they're selling. I'm more than familiar, which we'll get into as well. And Steve said this at the beginning, why I've used EuroPharmacies products. I know Steve has, but I'm a big fan of it. I've described them as my go-to. I say I've used other companies' products, and when I've used other companies' products, I will say that I've used other companies' products. But my daily go-to, my touchdown photograph, what's in my little stash right now, 95% EuroPharmacies, because for me, it does what it says on the tin. It works. It's a good price, solid product. And I like, and I said this right when the 15 mil vial started, I says, I like the fact they're being innovative. I like the fact that they're experimenting in a different direction. I like the fact it's ever so slightly cheaper. This is great for the end customer, of course. And again, it's like I've got some of those 15 mil vials here. And one of the other things I said, which definitely seems to be the case, Steve, not completely, guys, not yet, but as a good long list, as it is, and it's expanding all the time, is, as I said, I thought that every single 10 ml vial option of any of the EuroPharmacies PEDs will all, at some point, in my opinion, just me, the person doing this podcast with Steve, not necessarily from the horse's mouth, I think that they will completely switch over every product they do to the 15 ml vial. And an obvious thing here, Steve, which is super, super important, and we will touch upon this again at the end, it needs to do what we want it to do. In other words, it's the same high quality product in the 15 ml vial. Now, there's nothing to stop you going anywhere else. You might go, I don't like, I've been in companies, Steve, where they introduce something new. You're like, yeah, I like the old way. That happens all the time. Sometimes we resist change, but here, solid product, works just as effective as before, does what it says on the tin, and it's presented to you in ever so slightly cheaper way for you, because some of the savings are being passed on to you. And in a way, it's actually arguably easier for you to use because you're not buying 3 of something, you're having to buy 2 of something. And that's just for a typical cycle. What do you think about that, Stephen? What about yourself in terms of your experience and a little bit on the history as well?
So it's always a risk for, any company, no matter what industry it is, whether it's a steroid industry,
Yeah.
car industry.
Coca-Cola, Steve, original, and they had to go back to the original because people wanted original. It's a good example.
It's always a risk when they make changes. Customers don't like changes. It could be as simple as on a car removing the stalks, where you have to point with your finger how to go drive or reverse. A lot of people don't like that. A lot of people are scared of change, and they'll actually be like, well, I want to buy the model previously, I don't want the new model. We see this with software, with your phones. The new software comes out, the font changes, things change. That shit annoys the shit out of me personally. Like, even a font change annoys the shit out of me. Windows, software, when Windows came out and they took away the shell version, it annoyed the shit out of me. I actually still download the shell, so I could get the shell version, because I've been on that version for 20 years, and now you're changing to something completely different. So it's always a risk. I've seen this back in the day when there weren't, there was so many underground labs, and all these underground labs, there was some dude making gear out of his, toilet or his bathtub and selling it on the, online to people, or selling it in the gym. I've seen these little fly-by-night underground labs that were out there, and I've seen them make little changes. They changed their even the pop-offs. When you get a vial and you pop up the top, I've seen brands do away with the pop-ups. They're like, why am I spending this extra money for pop-ups when it's pointless? Just freaking swab the top and go. Literally just removing that. I've seen people stop using the gear. I've seen people post on forums, oh, they sent me this vial and didn't have the pop-up.
Yeah, it's not the same. Is it fake? Is it
I
the
need the
same legitimate
pop-up.
product?
Or having the rubber stoppers being low quality. I'm drawing with and the rubber stopper falls apart. So any little thing, I've seen this.
Color of the pills, Steve, different colors, and it's only food dye. It
Yeah, it
doesn't
could
make
be
any
any of that.
difference.
And the colors of the oils change, all the batches different. Just any little
Yep,
change can scare a customer. Same thing with cars, same thing with software, whatever. So companies have to be very careful with doing this. But your pharmacies, they did a good job of offering both. They offered the 15 milliliter, they offered the 10 milliliter on these products, and they saw that people were liking the 15 milliliter. They weren't
yep,
scared of the 15 milliliter. So now they offer 11, as of today, 11, and I expect them to offer
yep.
more. We're going to go over
I
those
do. Yep.
11 later in the show. So it's going to be, at the end of the day, EuroPharmacies, a big thing, Mobster, is EuroPharmacies has a reputation. So nobody's scared. If they get a 15 milliliter vial, like, what the hell is this? They know, okay, it's from EuroPharmacies. I can verify it. I'm
Yep.
getting it from a legit source that sells EuroPharmacies, and the third party seller is a legitimate source. I don't have to worry. They have their reputation now. It's not like an underground lab who the person who's
Yeah,
running
they've
it.
been around 20 plus years, Steve. You don't stay, and I'll talk about this later on as well, but you don't, any company in any industry or product that you buy online that's been around for 20 years, if you weren't selling product that people wanted to buy, you wouldn't last 20 years. It's as simple as that. It doesn't matter whether it's a jar of jam, strawberry preserve, your breakfast cereal that you have in the morning, or steroids. You do not get to last 20 years without a solid customer base that likes what you do. And when it comes to performance enhancing drugs, when it comes to anabolic steroids, you don't get to last 20 years if the product that you're sending out to people doesn't work. I will expand again on this later on, but as an example, and I've told this story on a previous EuroPharmacies based podcast. I said there was one particular product that they didn't manufacture in house. They had it manufactured somewhere else. And they lab tested this product, checked the quality to make sure it's up to standard. Within 3 days of the test coming back, they'd sent an email to every single customer that had bought this product with a credit on the next order for the value of the product that they bought, and made sure that they never use that supplier again, corrected the problem straight away. And obviously, because they'd done in-house testing, out-house testing, independent testing on this particular product, they was able to spot that there was a fuck up. And rather than pretend that it hadn't happened, rather than sweep it under the carpet, they literally contacted everybody. We saw posts from the reps on the forums telling, if you got this, check this batch number, let us know, contact us on this email address, etc., etc. That's the kind of stuff that we like to see. You see it when you go to your supermarket. There'll be a notice on the door. This product might have small fragments of metal in. Please come to our customer service. We'll replace it free of charge, yada, yada, yada. And that's how you keep your reputation. So literally doing that and being that way and being innovative and expanding into, and I've touched upon this before, I said, give an example again, Steve. And again, I'll expand on why we like them as well at the end. And as example, this was via one of their resellers where they were asking via EuroPharmacies, what information aren't we giving you that you want to see? What products that you think might be available that we're not selling right now, would you like us to hold? And so on and so forth. And that kind of keeping in touch with the customer, listening to customer feedback, seeing what the customer actually wants, seeing what's out there in the marketplace that maybe they've taken away off the ball for, but you haven't, that you're aware of. Is there another company producing this product that we could manufacture for you? Because we'd love to keep you as a customer. We want your custom for all of our products, and we're not producing this product. You tell us what it is. We'll look at it. We'll see if we can manufacture it to a high standard, and we'll do that for you. And that's it. There was way more of that now, Steve, in the marketplace than there's ever been before. And I'm just talking about cars, anything you care to think. Back in the day, and I'm just about old enough to remember this, it was Hobson's choice. You got what they had. You would have to go to multiple companies or whatever else. You couldn't get stuff all in one place. So yes, Steve, what about that for you?
Yeah, and that sums it up pretty much, buddy. One of the things we see a lot when it comes to steroids and people who complain, they want to make sure that what they're getting is consistent, and when they find something, they want to make sure, yeah, I can go back and get it the same. So it's really cool. They made this slight change that's going to benefit, because it's, even if it saves $5 or $10 a vial to the consumer, they're able to buy a little more, and you're saving in the process. So you're getting 50% more in the vial, but you're only paying maybe 25% more. So that little bit of an advantage will allow you, and as you said, we're talking about 2 vials of the 15 milliliters, 30 milliliters versus 3, which are 30 milliliters. So
Which
there's
costs more to
less.
post, costs more to distribute, costs more to manufacture.
Yeah, so that pretty much sums it up. And your pharmacies, they've always tried to be, an innovator, as you said earlier, and try to move things forward. And that forces other brands to also move their stuff forward. So it's very important that we have these types of leaders in the industry, just like with cars. It's very important that cars transition to electric vehicles. We have to, our planet is at stake. So somebody has to take a step forward and do it. If everybody just says, I'll just wait for someone else to do it, then it never gets done. Someone's got to take the step
Let me give
forward.
you one analogy like that, Steve. The Mercedes S-Class is a great example. I don't drive, God help me, but I do read car magazines. And the Mercedes S-Class had this reputation that they would have the latest thing on their very top of the range limousine. So, for example, I think they had double glazed windows when no one else did, which reduced sound and kept it warm inside on a cold day, and so on and so forth. They introduced other things, and one of the things that would happen is that this innovator at the top end of the line in a luxury car that's costing you €100,000 or whatever, you would see in other cars 3 or 4 years later. You would see in the cheaper cars 5 or 10 years later. So if you saw it in the Mercedes S-Class, you knew it was coming. If they could afford it and if the price could be brought down, it was going to be introduced. By that point, of course, Mercedes had moved forward. So you do need companies that are willing to take a little bit of a risk and try something different sometimes. It doesn't have to be in the product itself. It doesn't have to be in the Masteron or this testosterone and amphate or whatever else, but it can be in production quality. It can be in the 15 mil vials. It can be in the way that it's crimped and sealed. It can be, for example, one of the things they've done some years ago is, and this has probably come across over from the pharmaceutical industry on certainly on the 10 mils right now, and I think it's going to be on a 50 mil. I could check where we were talking. They do the 3-layer label. So the label that you see when you get your vial in the post, when it gets delivered to you, when your buddy hands it over to you, whatever else, there's multiple layers. Top layer gives you most of the information you need to do, but there's a little bit up in the corner, and if you peel it very carefully off, there's the information on the back of the label, and then there's another page of information on the label underneath, which is actually stuck to the vial. So they were one of the companies that were doing it, again, I think ahead of the curve. Certainly maybe not the first to do it, but certainly one of those things that they were doing with other companies out there are starting to catch up and think about doing that as well. I've said on other shows, we've seen products where it looks like it's been done with my very first baby's printing kit. Product inside might be sound, but it's a horrendous label. It just looks like it's been photocopied and stuck on or whatever. So these kind of things, these innovations, these small tweaks and changes are appreciated. If you're copying some of what the pharmaceutical industry is doing into your lab that's producing anabolic steroids, it makes you feel like these people know what they're doing, that it's a high quality product, and it's giving you every little tiny bit of information you might need. You don't have to go online, it's right there on the label, and so on and so forth. And that's precisely the kind of stuff that we like to see. I'll tell you what I think as well, Steve, before we move on. It's going to come down to, will we see other companies doing similar things? I'm going to say yes, because if they see EuroPharmacies doing it and they know that, why would EuroPharmacies switch over to the whole line? Why have they gone from 3-4 products to 11 products? Because it's selling, because it's moving, because customers are using it, because customers still trust the product, and the quality of the product inside is the same high quality it was before. And that would mean other companies would do the same. They'll start to say, well, why don't we offer 1 item, 2 items? Let's see what happens. And the next thing you know, everybody in the industry is doing it. But at that point, of course, EuroPharmacies has moved on again, or made some other small change, or some other small improvement to the quality, or done a better website, better access to this kind of information that you might need, more instantaneous, faster information, and so on and so forth. So it's just bits and pieces. I like the fact that somebody somewhere in that company isn't just sitting on their ass, resting on their laurels, not needing to change things. The products sell, we don't need to no, they're thinking, right, what can we do to improve our product? And that should be the case in any industry. Sometimes you need someone else to do it, to liven your company up, to make you better than you was, and so on and so forth. I'll use this example, silly little example, Steve. So I'm reasonably good at certain particular things when it comes to lifting weights. But I'm always better if there's someone better than me in the same place. I lift up my game. I train harder. I lift more. I am more competitive because someone stronger than me, doesn't have to be vastly stronger, just 10, 15%. I want to play catch up. So instead of being perfectly okay with being a strong motherfucker, I want to be a stronger motherfucker. So that's how the industry works. That's how this works. You do this thing, other companies decide what you've done is a good idea, they copy you, you get to be better than you was. And that's how this should work. And I think that's exactly what we're looking at here. It's no big deal really, Steve. It's only half as much again, but it's innovative. It's out there, it's pushing the envelope, it's making people uncomfortable, and it's making them go, do you know what? If it sells, and if EuroPharmacies are selling, why don't we do it? So that lifts the industry up and pushes it forward. Now, it will either work for everybody or it won't. We shall see. But they wouldn't have expanded into the product line the way that they've done. They wouldn't have invested the money they would have needed to invest, which would be tens of thousands of dollars at a time, just buying in hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of these vials. Same thing with the labels, same thing with everything else they've done. It's a much bigger investment than people think. If we were knocking this stuff, you and I, out of some garage somewhere and printing stuff on our printers in the house, no big deal. But when you're a big company that's been around for 20 years, distributing products all over the world and doing so successfully, it's a big time investment, especially if you've got a proper lab set up and a manufacturing line and all the rest of that kind of stuff. Let's talk a little bit now, Steve, if that's okay with you. We'll talk about some of the products.
Yeah, so let's get into it. So very important that we not only discuss the products, we also discuss the milligrams per milliliter because they are a little different. The EuroPharmacies has different options to choose from, and I kind of like what they did here with these 15 milliliter vials. Is they did the milliliters a little more, so it's more flexible. And here's what they did with the EuroPharmacies Boldenone, which is equipoise. It comes in 200 milligram a milliliter. And with equipoise, it's one of the best steroids out there when it comes to being active. It's one of those steroids. If you run it over 300 milligrams, you'll have a subtle change to your appetite increase, but not much. I've run equipoise, recently a couple times, and the first time I'd run equipoise, I hadn't run it in a while. I did notice a little bit of appetite increase, but the second time I ran it, I didn't notice really very much at all, if any, appetite increase. So it's one of those steroids where it just depends on how much you use it. The more you use, obviously, you're going to have more of an appetite increase as your body grows and your body gets stronger. Obviously, it's going to want more food in the process. So the equipoise, what I like about equipoise, it's a mild steroid. The side effects are very manageable. There's a lot of different ways that you can use equipoise. You can use it anywhere from 200 milligrams a week to 400 milligrams, 600 milligrams. Some guys go higher. Some guys like to go, higher with equipoise and run low tests with it. Some guys like to run equipoise and testosterone at the same dosage. It just depends on what you want to do. But at the end of the day, because of the long ester that comes with this EuroPharmacies Boldenone, you're going to want to run it at least 10, 12 weeks to get the full benefits. A lot of guys like to run at 14 weeks or 16 weeks. Keep in mind, though, recovery is going to be harder because you're on something. The longer you're on something, the longer you're shut down, the harder it's going to be for your body to recover. So we know that. So even in that case, even though it's got a long half-life, it's going to be in your system a while, I would still cut it off at just 12 weeks. I know that it's only going to be peaking your system for 4 or 5 weeks, but I don't care. I want you to recover properly. So there's different ways to use it. When it comes to, things like Tren, you can stack it with Tren. I've done that before. It's a good option in that situation if you want to do a bulk. You can use it with a cutting oral like the EuroPharmacies T-Bol or the EuroPharmacies Anavar, and you can stack them together with a little bit of testosterone in there. The nice thing about equipoise is it doesn't cause estrogen problems because of the long ester and the slow conversion to estrogen in the body. Even though it's a testosterone derivative, you don't have to worry about certain side effects when it comes to using it. So I'll give you some examples with dosing, Mobster, and you can talk about what you want to do. So equipoise anywhere from 200 to 600 milligrams a week, with 400 milligrams being the average. Let's say you want to stack it with something like Turinabol or the EuroPharmacies Anavar. So EuroPharmacies T-Bol or EuroPharmacies Anavar. You could do anywhere from 20 up to 50 milligrams a day of either one of those. I wouldn't run them together in this situation, but I'd pick one. And then you can add in some testosterone. 100 milligrams, 150 milligrams, maybe 200 milligrams. You don't want to go too high on the testosterone in this example, because remember, you're trying to get lean muscle mass in this example. So if you run too much testosterone, you'll start retaining water. You'll start needing an aromatase inhibitor, et cetera, et cetera. But if you do want to do that, EuroPharmacies has you covered because they do have, the EuroPharmacies Aromasin, 8X, Letro, et cetera. So they do have AIs that you can do. So if you want to go down that route, you can. It just depends how you react to testosterone. But if you want lean muscle mass, I would do it like that. I would do the equipoise around 400 milligrams. I would do the T-Bol or the Anavar around 30, 40 milligrams. And then I would throw in a little bit of testosterone, but not much. Maybe a TRT dose, 100, 150 milligrams. And you'll get a good, do that. You could do 12 weeks on the injectable part and then do 6 weeks on the oral part. And that would work really good. Either you can kickstart it with the oral or finish the cycle with the oral for 6 weeks. and that would be a good little lean muscle mass option. If you want a bulk, then in that situation, you could do 500 milligrams equipoise and maybe 400 milligrams testosterone. And in that situation, you want to throw in a little bit of an AI. You could also throw in some Dianabol. And Dianabol would be a good one to throw in there at 20, 30 milligrams a day, just for like the first 4 weeks to give it a little kick. And then in that situation, you'd probably want to go ahead and run an AI to keep your estrogen under control. So those are, I like Equipoise Mobster. It's very versatile. You can cut on it, you can recomp on it, you can use it for sports, for athleticism, or you can use it to bulk. It's very versatile, and I've used it for all those things, and it works really well. Just depends how you stack it. And then you can always just use it by itself. Some people like to just use it by itself. There's nothing wrong with using it by itself. It's a testosterone derivative. It's not a DHT derivative. So you can use it by itself. You can get some good results in that aspect as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, the next one, and this is a second product that they're producing in this particular form, drostanolone enanthate, and they also do a drostanolone propionate. So essentially, we're talking about Masteron here, and previous podcasts from Steve and I have done, we focus specifically on the hardening effects, and I'm going to talk about that as well. And we say, okay, in the case of the enanthate, you're looking at 150 milligrams, so the longer ester is 150 milligrams a milliliter, and the shorter propionate ester is 75 milligrams a milliliter. And I can see the reasoning behind this for obvious things in terms of the one that's in your system longer, requiring less injections. We talked about this, and this applies to all anabolic steroids. The shorter the ester, the more likely you are to get post-injection pain. And also, the shorter the ester, you're more likely to see that in someone that's getting in shape specifically for a competition. So you don't want a longer acting ester that you can manipulate because it's much harder. In a competition cycle, especially as the competition itself approaches, you want a shorter ester. Now, there's two reasons, like we said. The number one use pretty much of Masteron when you ask users, especially when we're talking about this on the forums, would be for the hardening effects. And we point out a couple of things here, and that's obvious. If your body fat's too high, it's all well and good having a hard muscle underneath the body fat, but if you want to show the results of your hard work, you're going to want to be leaner, so you'll get more benefit from it. The other thing, and something that Steve and I have touched upon in recent shows, is the fact that this is actually going to make a small amount of this, and you could always use Proviron instead, of course, Steve, as an oral, is to boost the effects of the steroids you're taking. So that will actually allow for you to be a slightly higher percentage of body fat because you're not using it specifically for the hardening effects. That would be a bonus, but we're using because it's binding the SHBG, which is increasing free testosterone, which means you're getting more bang for your buck. There's a lovely sort of line. If I was pushing this product, that would be the taglines underneath, Steve. So what about dosages? I mean, again, one is at 150, the other one's at 75. How would I use it? I would probably go for the enanthate for myself, simply again for the SHBG / free testosterone boosting properties. And ironically, I'd probably only use 150 over the whole week, Steve, but I would combine that with whatever the rest of the cycle was. So, for example, as Steve said already, let's say that I'm going to use enanthate version, 150 milligrams for the purposes of what he said, and then maybe 3 to 350 milligrams of testosterone, and I might even use the EQ, like Steve said, especially if I'm a cutter. So I'm going to get the hardening, I'm going to get the cutting, and I'm also going to get a little bit of anabolism from the muscle, from the boosting from the testosterone. And I like to keep things well under a gram if I possibly can, Steve. So again, in this example, I'm thinking probably around 650 milligrams, which could be 325 milligrams of the EQ, 325 milligrams of a form of test, probably enanthate again, and just 75 milligrams, half a mil of the drostanolone enanthate. And that keeps it around that 800 milligrams total, maybe a little bit higher. One of the things I will say, and this could apply to any of the cycles that we're talking about, occasionally I will see somebody say something like, I'm going to go big this cycle, or I'm going to go this amount this cycle, or I'm going to go hardcore. And, it's because they're getting excited about the upcoming cycle and they want to be great, etc., etc. And I will say sometimes, Steve, if the last cycle worked and you had great results from the last cycle, let's say, for example, you gained 8 pounds, which would be fabulous, I wouldn't expect you to gain 10 or 12 pounds just because you've upped the dosages like crazy motherfucker because you're getting a little bit carried away. If £8 is what you gained last time, who knows? You might gain £6 or £7 this time. Might not be £8, but 6 or 7 when the previous cycle was 8 and your first cycle was 10 will be fucking amazing. You do not need to up the dosages just because, and you do not need to try every anabolic steroid ever again just because. It is useful, as in the examples that Steve and I are giving right now, to have a knowledge of how you work with certain steroids, the results you got from using those. Didn't like the side effect on this one. We use a longer ester version. Didn't get on with the side effects of Tren. Won't be using Tren again. Gained fantastic amounts of lean muscle, but it was a bit too watery. Can I manipulate the cycle so there's less water and so on? So these come from experience, but you don't actually have to up the dosage just because it's your third cycle, nor do you need to change a stack that worked for you before to something completely different just because. It's kind of weird, Steve, and I see this in terms of I want you to have experience what works for you, but you don't need to have experience of everything else out there, purely and simply because someone else has already done it for you. And if they look like you, they train like you, then your results are likely to be the same. So move on to another one, Steve. I'll touch on one very quickly because this is a huge favourite of mine, and I would combine this. That's their nandrolone decanate, Steve, which they've got at 200 milligrams a milliliter. And as you know, and especially as our regular listeners know, it's one of my favourites. One of my favorite injectables ever. And I will very quickly, they've got a Sustanon 250. Previously, I believe products, very similar product, and I think at one point one of the resellers was selling both. They had what was called a testosterone blend. And to be right to say, it's exactly the same product. It's just a slightly different name. So right, I'll very quickly here, Steve. They do this. The Sustanon blend is test prop, which I think is 50 milligrams. Testosterone phenyl, I can't even begin to pronounce it, Steve, you might be better than me. That's 60 milligrams. Testosterone isocaprionate, 60 milligrams, and testosterone decanate at 100 milligrams. Now, as I said to previously, I love this cycle. I love this combination of the two, the Deca and the Sustanon together. It's one of my favorite bulking cycles of all time. And I have had, as one of Ali G's characters, whatever, it says they have great success. Pretty much every single time I've ever run this. My most recent one, which will be late October, early November of last year, so 2023, as we do this show 2024, I bulked up to my all-time highest body weight of 336 pounds, just running a Sustanon Deca cycle. In previous years, I would go for, and I'm talking about early 2000, 2006, 2007, I was able to go from my sitting around all day long body weight of 280 to very, very close to or just on 300 pounds across two different cycles at 2 different years. So for me, as probably the best bulker that I've ever used. And I've never needed to run either of these at crazy amounts. In fact, the one I did 2023 was ever so slightly, it's the highest I've ever taken on any cycle, which was a combined total of 1,050 milligrams. But Steve, 2 mil of these, 1 mil at a time, twice a week, say Mondays and Thursdays. So 1 mil of testosterone, sorry, Sustanon 250, and 1 mil of the Deca. That's only 450 milligrams. Maybe fractionally more than that, Steve. And again, every 4 days. It works out to less than you think the combined total. So it's actually closer to 800 milligrams than 900 because it's over the 4 days and averaged over the 7. It's slightly under. I think it's about 675, 700 and something. The lower end to around the mid 700s at the higher end, which is probably what I would do now. I don't need to get to 336 pounds even. I've had absolutely amazing results on that. And both of these are super, super popular in that particular regards. For me, not only did I bulk up, the leverage I got from being that much bigger, because 20 pounds, even on my 6'3", Steve, is very, very close to 1.5 inches all over. So well, that's my forearms, my bicep, my triceps, my whatever. The leverage I get, being that much bigger, being bulked out, means that I have a better leverage for strength exercise like benching, pressing, squatting, whatever. Anything where I'm bouncing off the muscle underneath or against the muscle, the leverage is increased because I'm that much bigger as well. And of course, they do have a small degree of strength enhancement as well. What about you, Steve, in terms of using either of these two for bulking?
Yeah, I strongly recommend when it comes to nandrolone, always using the EuroPharmacies Proviron with it. And that's important because you balance
I
things
would
out.
now, Steve, 100% now. Absolutely. Yeah. A small amount, just 25 milligrams a day.
So you want to balance the DHN and DHT in the body, and that will help balance things out, help make a smoother recovery. Also, it's going to help bind the SHBG, so it makes the entire cycle better. Now, the
Yes.
difference between the nandrolone decanate and the nandrolone phenylpropionate, besides the milligrams a milliliter, the decanate's got 200 milligrams a milliliter. That's why people call it deca. Because it's got a decanate ester, so it's a very long ester. The phenylpropionate is more of an intermediate short ester, especially compared to the deca ester, and it's only 75 milligrams a milliliter. So differences would be if you want to do a short 6 to 8 week cycle, you can go with the
Yeah.
phenylpropionate. If you want to go a lot longer, 10, 12 weeks, then you
Yeah.
go with the decanate. And of course, 10 or 12 weeks is probably not even long enough, but again, we want to recover properly. So very, very important. And look, nandrolones are incredible when it comes to appetite. That's one of the things you're going to notice. So I would strictly use a nandrolone for bulking. I
Yeah.
wouldn't use it for cutting because it's going to be hard to cut when you're hungry all the time. You wake up hungry, you go to sleep hungry, you wake up middle of the night hungry. It doesn't make any sense to run something that makes you hungry all the time when you're cutting in most situations, unless it's like growth hormone, because growth hormone does have fat burning purposes and will increase
Steve,
appetite.
I'll jump in very, very quickly. Sorry, just to reiterate what Steve said or to reinforce what Steve said. I've told this story before, running this particular combination. And the analogy, the story that I've told before, Steve, was me thinking about eating food while I'm eating food. In other words, I was thinking about the next meal while I was filling my belly with the meal before. So my hunger went through the roof. It wasn't oh, I'm full up, I can't think about eating anything else right now. I was literally thinking about what I'm going to have in an hour or two. So that was number one. Something else as well, Steve, and I should have actually said this myself. And Steve and I discussed this on another show. The longer esters, one of the things that we sometimes forget, especially with this combination that I've described, is just how long these are in your system with the longer esters. So I wasn't even thinking about this, and I should know better. We do these podcasts, Steve, we're out there giving this information out. But I couldn't work out why I was still as strong. This is again after the bulk of last year for several weeks, I think 3 or 4 weeks. I was writing on my log on the forums, still pushing 180 kilos, still nearly 400 pounds on the bench press. I should have dropped back down a little bit in strength to maybe 170, 175, something like that. But I was still able to get some really, really big numbers. And as Steve pointed out on another show, and I should have known, I really ought to remember this stuff sometimes, Steve. It's because the esters was in my system for weeks afterwards. Weeks. It took ages for me to drop some of that body weight. It went off eventually, but it took weeks for me to drop down to under 330 pounds. I was pushing big weights on certain exercises for 3 or 4 weeks after the suckling. Well, of fucking course I was, Steve. I was using the longer esters. I think we said something to the effects of it was close to 6 to 8 weeks just to get down to the half the dose in my system, because of course it had built up over the weeks that I've been on the cycle. And I was only on it for 4 weeks, Steve, but it's still built up in 4 weeks. You hadn't cleared it out of your system when you're taking the next injection. So I was strong 4 weeks afterwards. I was relatively big 4 weeks afterwards because of the longer esters. So again, there's the advantage of using the shorter esters to have it clear quickly from your system. I could see, for example, competing bodybuilder doing this cycle at the beginning, the first 4, 5, 6 weeks of a competition cycle. And so if a typical competition cycle, 16 weeks, you're much more likely to see them using shorter esters and manipulating the variables towards the end, but still retaining some of the muscle that they had, just not as bulked up as they once was, because they don't need to be at 16 weeks. I only run it for 4 weeks, but I've run this cycle for 8 weeks multiple times in the past. It suited me perfectly fine. And again, I think I was just more aware that I'd retained their strength this time because I'd forgotten how long the esters are in your system. And it's something that Steve's talked about before. Back to you, Steve.
So let's touch on the different testosterone options from EuroPharmacies. Mobster touched on Sustanon, which comes in 250 milligrams a milliliter. EuroPharmacies, they also have the testosterone cypionate. They also have the testosterone enanthate, which is 200 milligrams a milliliter each. And then they have a testosterone propionate, which is 75 milligrams per milliliter. So it really depends on what you're looking for. And the
Yep.
way I presented them, the order is long ester to short ester. So succinon would be the longest ester. Then you'd have cypionate. Then you have enanthate. Then you have propionate in that order. So the shorter the cycle you want to do, the shorter the ester you want to do. So if you only want to do a 6 or 8 week cycle, go with the propionate. If you want to do a 10 weeker, you can go with the enanthate. If you want to go 12 weeks, go with the cypionate. If you're going to go longer or do TRT, then you go with the succinon. Succinon was, of course, developed for TRT. A lot of people
Yes.
like
Yes.
the succinon idea where you do a larger amount infrequently. So if you want to do 500 milligrams a week, you would do 4 cc's of succinon, which is going to come out to 1,000 milligrams, but you do it every 2 weeks. So it comes out
Yes.
to 500 milligrams. You want to do 250, you do 500 milligrams all in one shot every 2 weeks, and that would come out to 250 milligrams. So that's the idea behind succinon. Now, propionate, you're going to have to inject it every other day. Maybe you can get away with every 2.5, 3 days. That's fine. You can. I'm not maybe. You can. I have a lot more respect for esters than other people out there who don't understand how they work. So
Yeah.
that's the kind of thing. Now with test E and test SIP, you can go ahead and inject them once or twice a week. It'd be perfectly fine. Even with the test SIP, you can inject it every 10 or 14 days, and you would be fine as well. So look, the bottom line with testosterone, the two main reasons guys will choose the EuroPharmacies testosterone, either for testosterone replacement therapy or as a base because they want to use a testosterone base. A lot of people like to use a testosterone base. They feel better on it. Their mood's better. Their libido's better. You don't have to use a
No,
testosterone,
no,
but a
not for
lot of people.
anabolic, not for muscle building, Steve. But as you said, and I think actually I would probably say, agreeing with Steve, that is the best reason for having a testosterone base. Not really necessarily because of effective muscle building properties or whatever else, because there are other options, and obviously some people just have their personal preferences. But more, as Steve said, because they like how they feel when they're on testosterone, which is important to a lot of people. The difference between that, for example, and the effect that you can have sometimes with tren on your mood and your sense, and especially if you're sensitive in that particular regards, or already, as we put it crudely, an arsehole off trend, what you're going to be like on trend, it can cause that particular problem if you're that way inclined. But yeah, I see that more as an actual supportive argument, Steve, how they feel on testosterone versus the actual results, which is supposedly what should matter as much, if not more. How you progress, are you getting lean, are you getting more muscular, are you getting stronger? And obviously this comes down to the reason you did the cycle in the first place. But if feel is important, I think there's a lot of people out there, certainly I'm going to say 50-60%, where how they feel on cycle is as important as the other parts. So testosterone then as the base for a cycle makes more sense to me in that particular way, Steve.
So the dosing of testosterone, it could be anywhere from 100 milligrams a week if you're doing like a TRT amount, or you can go as high as 1,000. Some guys even go more. The professionals, I've seen professional cycles, they go like 1,500, 2,000 milligrams a week even. That's an
Yeah,
insane
yeah,
amount.
yeah.
So the basic average for a cycle is somewhere between 250 and 500. It just depends. And you could
Yes.
stack it with any of the other steroids from your pharmacies. The orals, the injectables, it just depends on what your goal is. But with testosterone, the once you start increasing your testosterone dosage, it it becomes a very strong androgen and estrogen in the body. So you got to keep that in mind. So if you do use it at 200, 250 or more, especially if you're going 400 or 500 or more, you definitely are going to want to use one of the EuroPharmacies anti-estrogen drugs to help control estrogen. And they have different options. They have the Aromacin. I already talked about it, the Arimidex, and then the
Yeah, yeah.
Letro is a very good one to have on hand. It's not one you want to just go ahead and use. It's one to have on hand just in case something goes wrong.
On that subject, Steve, and it's just because I've occasionally seen this come up as a subject on the forums, and certainly when people discuss it. So I've seen multiple posts, ironically not for a while, but certainly a couple of years ago, where certain users that got on very well with testosterone will say, "I never use an AI on testosterone." And you go, okay, but obviously, as Steve said, if you run it at a higher dosage and completely what you're using it with, and so on and so forth, I would argue, Steve, that the higher the dosage, the more likely you are to need it. So there's a bunch of variables here, but variable number one is personal experience, how well you get on with something. Variable number two, which is sometimes not mentioned when they say, "Oh, I'm not using an AI because I've never needed one," or "I might have an AI on hand." And I've always said in that regard, I don't want to have problems and then treat it. I'd rather treat it so that I don't have problems. But that's me personally. What you're sometimes looking at is the condition of the athlete to begin with. If they are lean and muscular, they are less likely to have estrogen related problems as though they were not. And if they were prone to gyno before, they're going to be prone to gyno again. It makes more sense, but that's not what comes up. The conversation will be something like, I've never used it, or I'm only using an AI if I need to. You need to know the condition of the person, their experience, their age, how they respond. And even just as I said, if the dosages are not mentioned, they may never go over 500 milligrams. So listen, it's a bit complicated in that particular regard, but it's why we encourage you to do logs on the forum, to post up photographs. It's why we want to know your body fat percentage, your age, and to a lesser degree, your experience, and so on and so forth. So I would argue it isn't necessarily the case that everybody's running the same doses in the same condition and so on and so forth. And so what this person, Joe, over there on the forum says, "Oh, I never need an AI," doesn't mean you don't need an AI. You might be running a different amount. It might be the first time you've ever been on. You've got no idea. So you need to know these other snippets of information. It's why we ask you questions on the forum when you come along. It's why we sometimes might be a little bit, "Oh, I thought I gave you guys all you needed to know." No, this is your first cycle. Are you 15% plus body fat? Have you had issues with steroids before? Did you need an AI when you was running something like this? Arguably, Steve, and this also applies, and it's not a huge variable, but age. You know, how my condition, my muscularity, my body fat now compared to where when I first started. Steve. But let's move on to trend now as well, because I know that a lot of listeners love, not a lot, but a high enough percentage of listeners love the trend. So they're going to want to hear about the trend options, Steve.
EuroPharmacies has the 15 milliliter trend. They have the acetate, which is 75 milligram milliliter. They have the enanthate, which is 150 milligram milliliter. So look, Tren is just one of the strongest steroids out there. Of all the main steroids, it is the strongest. You know, we can be smart asses and say, "Oh, Steve, you know, this steroid Halo is stronger." Look, at the end of the day, you know, when it comes to the main steroids out there, there is nothing better than Tren. And there's a reason why you're able to achieve amazing things on that steroid, whether it be the way you look in the mirror and your physique, the way you hit personal records with mass, body weight, and strength. The fact that professional bodybuilders use Tren, the ones that deny they use Tren, well, you're not going to win. If the guy next to you is using Tren and you're not using Tren, you're not going to win. So if you want to go on stage and lose, then don't use Tren because everyone else is using it. So it doesn't make any sense to not use Tren. So Tren's a very important steroid in bodybuilding. And a little goes a long way. You know, you could start out with 150 milligrams, 200 milligrams. 50 milligrams makes a big difference. I've run 350 milligrams. I've run 300 milligrams. I've run 400 milligrams. And 400 milligrams, the side effects get unbearable. So it really makes a difference at how much you run. So
Yeah.
the average dose of Tren is somewhere around 300 milligrams a week. And that would be where you want to go. Now, you can run Tren by itself. You can stack Tren. It just depends. But the more things you stack with Tren and the more things you add that are androgens, the more side effects that you're going to get. So really, if it's your first time with Tren, I'd use it by itself, or I'd use it with something mild like Anavar or T-Bol.
Yes.
This way, you don't have to worry about the estrogen problems. You don't have to worry about more androgenic problems because you've got enough problems on Tren as it is. So really, it's a very powerful steroid and it has to be respected. But EuroPharmacies has a really good quality Tren and a lot of people like it. Touch on Tren a little bit, Mobster, and we got to talk about a little EuroPharmacies action.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, look, guys, Tren is one of those love it or hate it kind of products. I've seen people out there absolutely go crazy. Tren is God. Tren is gold. And I've used Tren. I used Tren in a cutting type product before my bulk last year. And does it work as recomposition? Absolutely. Did it help me cut? Absolutely. Did I like how I felt on Tren? No. I could feel the sensation of being ever so slightly toxic. But even for other people, they actually like that. They say, "Well, I can feel the drug fucking working because this, I know how I feel." when I'm using Tren. And so when I would argue it's the number one recomposition drug. Yeah, there are issues. I mean, there's a bunch of side effects, and we've covered this on other shows. One particular thing, which we speak about a little tiny bit, and I mentioned it in passing earlier on before I talked to you about EuroPharmacies themselves, is the mood altering effects. It is in a particular study involving gentlemen of a certain age, 60 plus, with pre-existing medical conditions. I believe there was two medications, and Tren was in this particular study the one, and the other study was for another one, which I think might have even been Halo, Steve, I'm not sure. Two steroids, including Tren, that actually gave dementia-like effects in these older gentlemen, and this was at medical dosages, not performance-enhancing dosages. So, and as I think I used the phrase earlier on, which applies here, Steve. If you're an arsehole off of steroids, and then you're a little bit more of an arsehole on steroids, then Tren's going to bring the beast out. And again, there's some users that like that. It's great for strength. It's great for recomposition. Again, I think I agree with Steve. Start at 300 milligrams and then just drop the dosage if you're struggling with the side effects. Maybe don't run it for the first time in the height of the summer. It's just starting to get real hot in America and to a lesser degree over here in the UK. Because if you're going to get the night sweats, if you do get it, you might want a fan. The T-Bowl cycle that Steve suggests is a great way, possibly swapping T-Bowl for Cardarine, where to keep your cardiovascular ability at least somewhere near to what it was, because Tren will fuck your cardio up. On the other hand, you're getting into shape without cardio, but you want to maintain some level of fitness to be able to move around while you're adding this muscle. But yeah, for some users, absolutely fucking amazing. I want to talk now specifically, and I'm looking at the EuroPharmacies lab page, Steve. We'll talk about, as I said earlier on, why I like EuroPharmacies. For me, it's like it's one of those big supermarkets where I know that I'm going to get whatever I actually need rather than something crazy, exotic, or whatever else. And even the supermarkets do little bits and pieces like that. But if I want some breads and milks and flours and sugar wells, I'm going to get what I want at a big supermarket. If I want something specific, I go this place or that place. I get the visit. Why? Because I know that I've used these products and they do exactly what they're supposed to. The Anavar makes me strong. The Dynabol makes me feel big. The deck of the sustenance, when I run it together, I'm the size of a fucking house. Never had shit results, Steve, honestly. So this is super important for me that you're getting exactly what you think you're getting. I like the fact, as I said earlier on, they're innovative. I like the fact that they're out there asking you via the resellers what information are we not giving you that you want. I like the fact that they've got the free label thing. But then there's just the obvious stuff. Why would we approve certain sources? Why do we rate Europharmacies? Like I said earlier on, history. They've been around at least 20 years. They have a full production line / pharmaceutical lab setup. We're not talking about some Johnny come lately working at some industrial unit under the cover of darkness here, or in some kitchen, which we can find online in videos on YouTube. I'm on the lab test results page, Steve. And we've talked about this with other products and other brands, where we know that not just in-house testing, and you can look at these tests for yourself on the page that I'm looking at on EuroPharmacies.net website. You can go off and find other people that have tested their products. Not only do they test in-house, as obvious, they will then also send products out for independent lab testing, but users of EuroPharmacies products have brought a vial of this, an amp of that, whatever, a bag of pills, and then sent the same thing off to a lab at their own expense to be tested. So you want these kind of things. You want that kind of feedback. And look, I'm biased. I use their products. So me doing this show, oh, it's just Mobster saying he's getting this. No, listen, don't worry about me. Go off and look. Go onto other forums, but come onto our forums and look. Look at the people that use it. Why do they use it all the time? Why are they going back to that regular? For some particular reason, Steve, it's not considered to be a certain particular way or whatever else, but it is. Their reps, I mean, we just had one on the other day, Steve, is that the reps are fucking amazing. You've got myself and others that use their product regularly, and we're out there kicking ass. One of them, super ripped all the fucking time, because that's his thing. Me out there, top 3, top 4 on the forums for pushing fucking stupid fucking weights all the time, and so on and so forth. Just as me representing in that particular way why I like EuroPharmacies. So there's loads of those kind of things. I mean, look, you don't get, as I said before, Steve, to last any serious length of time in this industry if you're not out there putting out solid products all the time. What do you think about EuroPharmacies before we finish, Steve?
Yeah, and you got to be able to trust what you're taking, and that's the key. EuroPharmacies is one of the top brands that I recommend, and the top reseller sources, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, they sell their products as well because
Yes.
number one, there's a demand for their products. Number two, their products are legit. Number three, as Mobster said, they have it all. So it's very important that you go and you order from a brand that has it all. This way, you can get everything you need on cycle, off cycle,
Yeah.
ancillaries, everything else. And that's very, very important. So I have a lot of respect for Europharmacies. They're definitely a solid source. Their orals are excellent, their injectables are excellent. Try out
Yeah.
their 15 milliliter vials and you'll be very impressed and you'll save money in the process. Mobster, take us into the disclaimer.
Yeah. Please note, we're not doctors and the opinions are ours. It's our view and based on our experience and views on the topic. Our podcasts are for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.